Level 1, Chapter 3. Level 1 Descriptors by Stephanie Sandoval. Level 1 students come to English-speaking classrooms with little to no English proficiency. Many students who are Level 1 are often in a state of shock because their situations that they come from are different from U.S. classrooms. Newcomers often display predictable characteristics of typical language acquisition and acculturation process. Many times students try to integrate by copying the conduct of native speakers of English. These characteristics are often interpreted by some as inappropriate attitudes, learning difficulties, or cognitive deficits. Listening. Level 1 students may be hearing new sounds not generally found in their first language. They rely on context clues in their environment to construct meaning. Speaking. Students often experience the silent period, in where they absorb and process new input in order to prepare themselves for future language production. Level 1 descriptors continue. Teachers should teach students formulaic language that is related to successful daily interaction and tasks by promoting interaction with peers. By interacting with peers in an informal setting, this helps English language learners become comfortable in their new environment and developing language such as words and phrases. Peer interaction should be included in daily reading. Students who are pre-literate rely on context print in order to understand print-based materials. Students who have reading skills in their first language begin to transfer their skills to English. Writing. Depending where they are in their Level 1 status, students may draw or copy letters, write letters, words and phrases, depending on their range of proficiency, and dictate words and phrases.
Okay, so this is Kirsten Matusiak. Teacher responsibilities. There's a lot of responsibilities for teachers of Level 1 learners. They need to provide early literacy development in education, despite the traditional lack of presence in middle and high school curriculum. It usually happens a little bit earlier, but that kind of support is extremely necessary for Level 1 students, even though mainstream teachers can't provide it to the student. That's why they need to be advocates for the students who don't really know what to expect and what the requirements are to succeed in an English setting. So they need to be the advocate and also teach the students what they need to take charge of in their own learning. Teachers for Level 1 learners have to draw upon literacy skills from the first language of the English learner, because those are highly impactful in carrying over and further developing English literacy skills. Daily language instruction is also extremely important because students need to be able to interact in their classroom sufficiently, and teachers are responsible also for recognizing the different levels of language production and pushing students to reach the next higher level, so being very aware of where their students are at and where they should be. They also are responsible for teaching the same set of standards to every student, regardless of Level 1 to whatever. They need to teach the same standards whether that student is at the same language expectation area or not. The teacher's responsibility is to scaffold their language expectations to still get the student to achieve the standards. They also need to, not just in English learning situations, in all of them, assess learners using similar formats to ones that they were instructed in, so that there's no confusion and no trickery. There's just support for the learners. So necessary assignment and assessment strategies in general should be about allowing students to demonstrate knowledge without language mastery. This means that while the language might not be perfect, there's still knowledge being acquired, and that you need to focus on the different methods of the student showing that knowledge and able to, in order to scaffold that student to assessment strategies, focused on correct answers more than the errors, and allow for some guidance from a bilingual teacher. That's not cheating, that's just further scaffolding. Also weight the grades according to linguistic strengths and explain directions orally with visual support, so that you're making sure that the student is aware of the instructions that they're being given to fairly assess them. Moving into listening and speaking, evaluating using nonverbal communication is a great method because students usually speak later than they are acquiring knowledge. So nonverbal communication, asking for demonstrations of understanding without requiring verbal communication are better ways to assess. And then, of course, prompt repetition, short responses, oral tests every day, and allowing first language oral responses are further ways to assess fairly for English.
Hi, this is Josie Bame, and I'm going to be going over the necessary assignment and assessment strategies when doing pre-reading and reading in the class. So when picking reading level materials, they should be age appropriate but also level appropriate, and we should have visuals to provide students with message abundancy so it can support them in their reading. We can also elicit physical responses, whether that be raising a hand or pointing to a picture. We can ask for demonstrations of understanding, such as drawing or matching or mimicking. We can also ask students to retell stories in text through props and acting, so just giving them another method to display their understanding. Another thing we can do is orally test every day for individual words and chunks of language to ensure that students are gathering the language that they need. And lastly, we can support first language reading by providing materials so that students aren't just literate in their second language that they're doing with us in class, but also their first language as well. So when assigning and assessing writing, there are also certain strategies to employ in the classroom. So we should be eliciting beginning writing. So students don't need to be writing paragraphs or essays, but there's other ways we can incorporate beginning writing, such as them just producing words or letters or even simple phrases. We should also use visuals to check for understanding, which again goes back to that message abundancy. We can also require students to supplement writing with visual support, again giving them another outlet to display their understanding of reading or another concept that they are writing about. And we should also welcome first language writing, again going back to having them be literate in both their first and their second languages. And it also is a way for them to learn more in their second language.
This is Courtney Dexter with Necessary Instructional Strategies in General. So to best prepare Level 1 students to demonstrate content mastery, teachers need to examine their assumptions regarding student background knowledge and language development, become familiar with student background, including culture, language, and experiences, pinpoint instructional level of each student to provide relevant strategic instruction in both language and content via differentiated instruction. This is important to determine whether to teach content that is more advanced or challenging, or to match instruction specifically to the needs of the students. In these cases, content standards will remain universal while the teacher actually differentiates based on student abilities. The teacher must find ways to help English language learners to apply their current abilities to those content standards. Generally speaking, providing sensory support to students, such as props, pictures, and models, will support students in learning content and language across the 4 domains: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. As much as possible, all 5 senses should be engaged, as this will help build connections to other learning. In regards to listening strategies, it's important to teach this level of learner basic commands. You can move forward with this via total physical response, or TPR, in which students mirror teacher actions and verbal commands. So think of the activity head, shoulders, knees, and toes, for example. You're physically modeling your touching of your head as you're saying head, touching of your shoulders to indicate shoulders, and saying the word shoulders, and so on. You will use simplified, correct language. Repeating and paraphrasing is needed. Keep in mind this is a temporary scaffold as students adjust to the language patterns of English. Make sure you don't oversimplify, and rephrase to use familiar language. So instead of saying, would you like to go use the water fountain, maybe would you like a drink of water? Of course, you want to allow sufficient wait time for students as they're processing information and understanding things in their new language. You'll model completion of graphic organizers during oral instruction to promote higher order thinking. So this is important to do because you can point out important ideas and relationships on a graphic organizer, such as a concept map, on the overhead as you're providing oral instruction to make those visual connections for your learner. Additionally, using think alouds to model processes in language is a great way to walk a student through a text. For example, you can step by step, as you're introducing information, talk about what you're doing and model that higher order thinking as you're moving forward.
This is Anthony Lentz, and right now we're going to be talking about the speaking strategies. So we need to encourage participation and discussion through nonverbal or brief communication, model content and academic language, and provide sentence frames to scaffold speaking skills. And focus on meaning rather than correctness of students' utterances, and reward attempts to communicate as a way to build confidence. All right, so when it comes to pre-reading and reading, one of the first things that we should do is teach pre-reading skills. This can include phonemic awareness, concepts of print, and phonics. Now, with concepts of print, this could even be something as something like showing them how to properly hold the book, or even going over punctuation. We should lay a foundation for comprehension. This includes building background knowledge and helping students to make connections to prior learning and experiences. Reading activities can include using extensive visual supports, so message abundancy, posters and pictures, and since level 1 students are typically unable to derive meaning from print alone. When it comes to instructional strategies for writing, we need to ask students to communicate through cutting and pasting images or drawings so they can have a sort of kinesthetic awareness and be able to use it in that way. Incorporate modeled, shared, and guided writing activities. And we can concentrate on student meaning rather than on correctness of expression. So going back to that idea of focusing on what they're trying to say rather than correcting their grammar or anything like that with their writing.
So now that we've learned the best strategies to implement in an ELD1 class, we are faced with the decision of asking the two most vital questions that stuck with us considering the new information we've gathered. The first one was primarily focused on technology, as it is a huge part of the Sweetwater District curriculum. So, since it is an extremely effective way for ELD1 students to learn English by drawing connections to their own native language, students will oftentimes use Google Translate. I was wanting to know what other technology-based resources students could utilize to support their learning process. Also, considering the listening and speaking portion of our chapter, the chapter discusses that even if students are not speaking, that does not mean they are not learning. Listening is a major part of the learning experience. However, the Common Core state standards list speaking and listening as an ELA standard. How much focus should be placed on the oral practice of the English language? And also, how can oral practice of the English language be encouraged in students that are experiencing the silent period? Thank you for your time. This was Hunter Warner,
Courtney Dexter,
Stephanie Sandoval,
Kirsten Matuziak,
And Anthony Lentz.
and Josie Babe.
Oh.
Please let us know if you have any additional questions regarding our presentation or Level 1 English learners, and stay tuned for our lesson.